Smashing. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today. My name is Charlotte Nichols. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Orange and North, and I'm also the co-chair of the APPG, along with Jonathan Gullis, who is my Conservative counterpart. So it's really great to have everyone here today, and I think it's a really timely discussion around inclusivity in apprenticeships. Last week, actually, was at the World Skills UK had their first EDI awards here, and there's some really great stuff happening in technical education and apprenticeships around diversity, but clearly there's a lot more that we could be doing. So I think we've got a really interesting discussion here today around drawing out some of those themes, and I'm delighted to be joined. We have Jenny Young, the Deputy Director of the Strategy and Policy and Engineering and Construction Industry Training Board. To say, I used to be a union officer for the engineering and construction industry, and there used to be a national agreement that was known as NIKI. So it was always a funny one to have to say, like, yeah, I'm going to the NIKI negotiations. And I was like, what? But I've still not got quite my mouth around that acronym just yet. We also have Kasim Choudhry, Multicultural Apprenticeship and Enterprise Ambassador for Pathway Group, and Beth Armstead, Belonging and Engagement Manager at the Institute of the Motor Industry. So a real mix of sectors there and experiences. So it'd be great to just sort of get into things. And of course, we've got people joining us online. Please do, if you have any questions or any points you want to raise, avail yourselves of the chat function, and we will make sure to sort of keep you in the loop as part of the meeting as much as we can. So if I could start with your good self, Jenny, ask you to introduce yourself and your work at the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board, and to share some of your experiences and insight around this topic.
Thank you so much. So yeah, the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board, I won't assume that everybody's familiar with it, so I'll just give you a very brief outline of the industry that we work with, the training board itself. I've been with them for 6 or so years. I'm an engineer by background, and in formal life before I joined ECITB, I worked at the Royal Academy of Engineering on diversity in engineering. I think industry career, and that has been an interesting precursor to this work. So the engineering construction industry is the contracting supply chain that does the design, installation, repair, maintenance, decommissioning, all the processing plant equipment in energy and critical processing sectors. So it's a key part of the economy. It's not a very visible part of the economy. I think that's part of the issue around apprenticeships generally, and also around attraction of more diverse candidates into apprenticeships. We do support employers that fall under our umbrella with some additional funding alongside the apprenticeship funding to help with the apprentices that they take on. And that's really because of the productivity issues that exist within the industry, which I'll touch on a bit in just a second. So I think just to give you a bit of context, the apprenticeships are a traditional entry path into engineering construction. Not the only path, we also try graduates and the direct hires as well. But they are a well-established route, but you're looking at very sort of niche areas of apprenticeships. So things like plating, rigging, pipe fitting, as well as project controls and design and drafting, those sorts of topics. So you're looking at often site-based roles based in sort of heavily industrial areas. And as I say, it's typically level 3 apprenticeships. They're also 3 to 4 years in length. And I think that's a factor around attraction and inclusion as well. We can touch on. The biggest challenge facing the industry is the volume of workers. So there is a huge appetite to try and increase the volume of new entrants coming into the industry. But because of the characteristics of the industry, it's a very man-hours based group of sectors. So the contracting supply chain can't afford to take on large volumes of people if they don't have work on their order books. And again, that's an issue which affects attraction and inclusion more widely. I think what we see generally across the industry is that there are, for apprenticeship applicants, there's a lot of family and friends that apply still, rather than people who are directed towards the sector because of career advice. And I think we're also looking at recruitment in sort of often fairly localised areas, sort of around the industrial clusters, perhaps, you know, north east, northwest, the north of Scotland as well, some of the south around Crawley. So in terms of diversifying and attraction intake, you've got the issues of the local demographics of the areas, which will influence how much you can diversify in terms of, say, ethnicity particularly. But one thing that we have been putting quite a bit of effort into is looking at trying to provide pathways that will lead to apprenticeships for people who are not in employment, education or training, and also ex-offenders as well. I mentioned the visibility, and that a lot of the people who end up in engineering construction currently have some association with the sector through family or friends. One of the other issues that I think we've seen feedback where the initial salaries, particularly in year 1 and year 2 of apprenticeships, will often be lower than those that a learner could get from, say, a level 2 apprenticeship in retail even. So I think that's quite a tough choice for people to make, to choose an apprenticeship which in all likelihood has much better progression opportunities and higher salaries later on, but they have to take an initial hit for lower salary because you're looking at a sector which generally is low margin and can't afford the overhead of people that can't be productive on a man-hours basis. Then it's a challenge for industry to try and take more people on who offer high salaries for the early years of apprenticeships. One of the things that we've been looking at specifically to try and address some of those challenges that the industry have faced, particularly through COVID and post-COVID, around apprenticeship entry and attracting people in, is to look at this fact that, you know, it's the level 3 in the areas we're looking at typically 3 or 4 years. So how can we look at shorter pathways that will get people on the track towards a career in engineering construction, which could then be through an apprenticeship at a later date, but where they can have an initial intervention, then work on the job, intervention, work on the job, and then progress through that area. And we've looked at these sort of work ready programs over the last couple of years, and they're starting to mobilise now. But the reason I mention those is because I think some of the challenges we found with those from a diversity perspective and inclusion perspective are relevant to this conversation about apprenticeships. So looking at the fact that those sort of localised programmes targeted at a particular area have required an awful lot of conversations and coordination between sort of multi-agency groups. So whether it's Department of Work and Pensions, the Job Centre Plus, the Career Transition Partnership, if you're looking at ex-military, local referral agencies, employers in the area, clients in the area. And I think all that coordination behind the scenes to ensure that you've got a programme that can really bring to life for people the opportunities that are available in the sector like engineering construction. That's quite a lot of investment up front that there isn't an easy way to support in the current climate. We've managed to support programmes for 47 needs to date, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I think in terms of proving the concept, it's good. And if there are mechanisms of looking at the the funding support for that sort of model that can then lead to people growing through a job and then moving into an apprenticeship at level 3 or beyond at a later date. And that's quite significant. I think there's also been quite a significant education piece with organisations on the ground in terms of the types of roles and the opportunities that are available, because they're not generally well understood because of the sector and the engineering construction industry being quite invisible in the public mind. The final thing I'll mention is for providers and teaching staff. I said at the beginning, there are a lot of the areas that we're concerned with for apprenticeships and feed-in programs for apprenticeships are quite niche areas. They're not going to be the volume programs for further education providers. And where you're looking to try and increase the volume of those areas, there is a funding challenge that those organisations face. Trying to ensure you've got the quality of teaching staff. Ideally, those would be people who have industry experience, but the further education sector can't afford to pay the salaries that would attract people out of industry. And then I think the other factor is if you want to increase the volume of apprenticeship delivery for those sort of niche areas, you need to increase the number of training staff, which requires cash flow up front to be able to do that. So I think there's a mismatch there between what the funding provider could draw down will allow them to do in that sort of market. I'll stop there. Have a chance. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jenny. And I think it's interesting that the conversations that we have through this group are often around, how the levy is applied and things like that. But actually, I think for industries like engineering, construction, some of the other pieces around sort of modularisation of skills and those sorts of things for an industry that there's a lot of contracting is something that is very important to look at in terms of how we get the right balance between something that employers feel able to invest in, but people also want to come in and do, and that matches the kind of sector that they're going into. So thank you very much for that. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions based on what's been said there. But before we get to those, I'm going to bring in Kasim Choudhry, who I believe is
joining us in person today.
Fantastic. There you are. I was going to say, I've got Zoom joiner. So even better.
Thankfully, Avanti did get me here on time.
Which, as someone who spends a lot of time on the fancy West Coast, I'm shocked by. Delighted that they've turned up for someone. So
thank you so much.
Introduce yourself.
As an introduction, some people know me. I can see some people on the screen that I recognise the names. My name is Kasim Choudhry. I am an executive director at Pathway Group. We are a national training provider. However, apprenticeships is quite a small part of what we do. We do a lot of pre-employment stuff. So that some of the points Jenny was mentioning about pre-employment programs and supporting people into, who are far away from the labour market into work. So that's a key part of what we do as our day-to-day business. I head up a lot of our engagement. So those activities include the Multicultural Apprenticeship Awards, the Multicultural Apprenticeship and Skills Alliance, the Apprenticeship Diversity and Social Mobility Forum, and of course we run a large event called the Festival of Apprenticeships, which is all about promoting the brand of apprenticeships. And I'm very pleased to see Liz here, who has supported us with this in Manchester. And the reason I'm here today is through LSBU, who support us with our event in London. And last week on Tuesday, we had 5,000 people from the South London area walk through the doors of Keir Oval, and that was their first exposure to what an apprenticeship is and what the opportunities are. And the fact that many of them have come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. We always know that south of the river always gets the sort of, isn't considered London and part of the city, but we're hoping to build that bridge there. And obviously in Birmingham, we had about 3,000 people turn up at Millennium Point, central Birmingham. Again, similar story, young kids from inner city schools in Birmingham coming to find out about opportunities that they can get involved in. For me, some of the, I understand some of the niche projects, very hard to get young people engaged into these kind of roles. But I think, we need to sell careers, and this is what, seems to be the big issue. We need to stop selling courses and start selling careers to these young people. So, and what that future looks like. We've done, been doing this for over 10 years. We've done tons of research and looked into all the different issues. The levy is underspent, it's not spent enough, it's not spent in the right way. How can we encourage more and more employers to spend the levy in the right way, working with providers and universities and all the other stakeholders within apprenticeships to broaden that reach? I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm probably wrong, so I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I think around 10,000 people apply for 100 positions with some of the top 4 organisations. And 9 times out of 10, what we're seeing is those people who are getting these funded degree apprenticeships tend to be from middle class and upper class backgrounds. And actually, those from lower class backgrounds aren't getting those free degree opportunities. And that's why I'm really proud that in Birmingham right now, well, in the West Midlands, Andy Street has launched Path to Apprenticeships, which is a pre-apprenticeship programme, which Pathway Group will be delivering, and we'll be looking at how do we reach those so-called hard to reach and give them that pre-employment training, that support with writing a CV, having some work experience, and understanding what the job market requires from them, because I think that is a big challenge we're seeing. I mean, we saw it over lockdown with the Kickstart scheme. A lot of young people coming into work but have no business acumen in terms of how to behave in an employment situation. I mean, as a provider for the Kickstart scheme and providing young people to employers, some of the complaints we faced from the employers that, young people just didn't want to turn up to work. And again, I don't know what the answer to that necessarily is, but what is it that we can do to train young people and make them work ready? And that's the first thing because an apprenticeship isn't necessarily training. I always say to people, an apprenticeship is a job because it is employment first. And a lot of people miss the fact that an apprenticeship is a job. And that's why when you're talking to people, particularly parents, so with our Festival of Apprenticeships, a key focus of our marketing was parents and grandparents. And I've spent hours on the phone to older members of the community, talking to them about how can they help their young grandchild. And it's phenomenal, the stories you hear. And you've got tons of work to do, but you've got this old lady on the phone who just wants to talk to you and try and understand what can they do to get their grandchild into work. And I think there is a challenge there that we've got to look at in terms of the branding of apprenticeships, the branding of FE. What are we doing to get people into it? There is a certain issue within ethnic minorities, particularly in that a degree is very prestigious. We always talk about the first graduate in the family. When we look at metrics in terms of measuring socio-economic backgrounds, we ask, are the parents graduates? What do they do for work? Free school meals, all of these sorts of things. So you can imagine a lot of parents from low socio-economic backgrounds want to push their kids to go towards university, whether or not it is the right thing for them, because they never had that opportunity and that status is still there. So, but actually what we knew in, say, the 90s, where we had, education, if you don't do a degree, you're going to hit the glass ceiling, no one's going to employ you, and that scaremongering, now that that's sort of starting to disappear, we now need to bring in some new comms that are going to really engage the next generation, because Gen Z is a whole different breed, and we've got to level with them. It's not about leveling up or leveling down. We've got to level together, and they've got to level up to a certain extent, and we've got to level down. And it's about making it a level playing field, because we're losing certain things that were great, but then also we can learn great things from them as well and implement them into our strategy and the things that we're doing. So just to sort of go back in terms of what can be done to increase diversity in apprenticeships, I think we need more jobs. We need more employers spending that levy. And if they're not spending it, providing it within their supply chain. So I know when I visited Toyota in Derby, they were actually utilising their levy to get apprenticeships through their supply chain. And again, there's so many other sectors, and that's just one example of one organisation positively transferring their levy within their supply chain to ensure that more and more people were taking up apprenticeships. And then if you're an organisation, you know, I went to British Airways, they've got fantastic training facilities, but again, they're not all being used by them. If you've got great training facilities, work with other employers. We need to get more employers working together, and that's part of what we do with the Alliance, the Multicultural Apprenticeship and Skills Alliance. Is all about getting everyone to work together. And last but not least, probably a cheeky plug, but we are looking, you know, we're running something called the Apprenticeship Branding Conference, because we want employers to understand that the brand of apprenticeship needs to be promoted more and more. And the biggest issue you've got with apprenticeships is retention and actual completions, people not completing their apprenticeships, and the cost that has on training providers, the cost it has on employers. And I touch on your point that sometimes, you know, for people, the wage that apprentices get isn't ideal. Yeah, that's great, but hang on a second, if you were to go to university and you had to pay for a degree and you had to pay for living and then you had to find the time to get a part-time job, you would still be in a worse situation doing that than you would be earning a little bit less as an apprentice. And actually, the amount of money, time, effort it takes for an employer and a training provider to train that one individual, no amount of money could actually cover that, because it's just a very, very unique opportunity for them.
Thank you very much for that. And I think I'm very interested in the point that you made about within certain ethnic minority communities and the status of apprenticeships versus the more traditional academic route. Because certainly that's something that within my own family and my own friendship group, we've seen, you know, I speak to Gen Z constituents all the time who are like, you know, this is great, I can get a degree without, you know, £100,000 of student debt or what have you. They, you know, they get it and they want to do it, but their parents thinking that it's, you know, somehow different or not the same, or and a lot of the pushback isn't coming from the young people that might want to take up an apprenticeship, but it's coming from their family and a certain stigma attached to it, particularly if you come from another country that doesn't have a sort of track record of things like apprenticeships for you to be able to kind of compare it to. So really interesting to hear about the work that you're doing in those sorts of spaces to encourage not just young people, but also parents and older people around boosting the status. Beth, if I could bring you in next, it's Beth Armstead from the Institute of the Motor Industry.
Yeah, so that's me. I also commonly go by B, so you might have seen that on my little introduction if you read it. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Belonging and Engagement Manager for the IMI. The IMI is the Institute of Motor Industry. It's been around forever. People don't realise it's been around forever because it's really quiet. We're starting to like really gain momentum as well, which is really cool at the moment. We are an awarding body and a professional body. We have over 80 centres in the whole of the UK, so it's like a lot of centres, which is why it's always funny, like people don't know about us, but we're there. And we have over 100,000 members, and we are increasing, which is pretty incredible. One of the things that we're finding at the moment with the motor sector is that there is so many myths about it. People think there's one job and it's the garage job. where they think of, and I'm thinking of because I'm new to the motor sector, I'm not from here, I've not worked in that, but before I started to learn about it through family and friends, you had that sort of Phil Mitchell, one garage, one guy, and that was your view. And a lot of people still have that view because the motor sector isn't painted as the diverse, incredible structure that it is, because there's over 218 jobs and they're growing all the time. And the EVs that are coming in as well means that there's even more jobs. It's an never-ending cycle of jobs, which is incredible. However, we have a massive gap of people not being employed by us. We are close to customer service and retail. And that's not great. We need these people in the jobs because everybody needs cars. Everybody needs someone developing more things for EVs, the structures, the engineering. There's so much incredible stuff, yet people aren't coming. We've noticed one of the reasons is actually because when you're around 5 years old, you actually start to paint what type of job you want. And that comes from your background. So whether you're working class, middle class, it can come through your cultural background, your race, but most specifically, gender. We already decide at a very young age what is, and I'm using the terms that think of what is a boy job and what is a girl job. One, gender isn't that simple anyway, so it's always entertaining that we do that still, but that's what happens. And when you speak to children who have already decided the motor sector's not for them, the words that they use are it's dirty, it's cold, and that's being plugged in from such a young age. Talking about apprenticeships and education and wanting to get people into the jobs, we need to get them to be passionate then. So we're talking about Gen Alpha, really, at the moment in time. So people like my little nephew, who's 3, we want to get him passionate at that age so that when he grows up, he becomes passionate about something forever. And I think the issue is definitely what you were thinking about degrees and it's prestigious and everything like that. I was the first to graduate in my family. My school pushed me towards a degree, but actually, as a dyslexic who maybe wasn't so great in the intellectual level, I actually would have thrived in the apprenticeship, but it wasn't painted as something I should do because it's more esteemed to have higher education than further education. And I think that language is extremely important to making sure that all of our working communities continue to be diverse and also to thrive. Because when you think about you're a kid and you're deciding, well, higher education sounds so much more prestigious than further education, because that seems like an extension, whereas this means I've gone above and beyond. So it's little things around language that are really important to making sure things continue. And it's things around that as well, like when I was saying about gender. Gender is really diverse. There are so many different genders, and yet we're still dividing things through male and female, which is sex. We need to look at that and decide around, are we making our spaces safe for all genders? And that's a really important thing that I think will help in places like the motor sector, because at the moment, all of our those people who are deciding their jobs when they're really young are deciding that it's not for them because they're not reflected in what's shown on TV. And actually, this is so vast and so wide. When we're talking about diversity and bringing people in, I always say that there's always been space for everyone in this world, no matter who you are. However, society put barriers in. So when you're looking at equality, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, you need to look at society being time to remove the barriers. The barriers shouldn't have been put in place anyway, but they were, and we can't undo that, unfortunately. So let's look what we can do. So for me, when I'm thinking about things, I think about my privilege. So I am white, I have that privilege, but I'm a woman, so I have less privilege there. However, I'm also a bisexual person, so I lose privilege there as well. I'm from a working class background that through my dad working and my mum working insanely hard became middle class, so that's a privilege there. And I'm also somebody who is neurodivergent and I'm classed as disabled as well. So I'm not one thing, I'm all these different things, and they sort of put me up in one place and then bring me down in others, which is mad when you think about it. There's title gives you something that goes down, but that's what we need to think about when we're thinking about diversity and we're trying to get it into our apprenticeship. We need to stop with the tick box exercise because I don't fit into one. it's impossible to fit into one because we are all human and we all have multiple things that we are. Even if you just go off the work titles, your work title is so long, there's so many amazing things in it, but you're not one thing. That's why that's there. So we need to be thinking about, rather than thinking about diversity and inclusion as tick, 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 we fit into this, that's done, that person deserves this and that person deserves that. We need to think as a whole. This person is a person, not a tick box. And I think with Gen Alpha especially, and Gen Z, they are so aware. I say they're, I'm part of it as well, but I'm like that weird cusp for millennial Gen Z. But we're like becoming more and more aware of like what our privileges, where the barriers that our friends, family, we face are. So we need to get on that level as well, and we need to speak about these things clearly. And rather than just raising awareness about these things, we need to make clear, cut, strong actions, which the IMI is currently doing themselves. They're working a diversity task force to talk about intersectionality as a whole and how we can move forward to make change. Because we're talking about apprentices now, we also need to be talking about apprentices in the future as well. Because there's people who are making decisions tomorrow about whether they want to do a degree or an apprenticeship, which is a massive, massive thing. But they're also who are young, and then we've also got people who are 40 who want to make a career change, but they can't decide maybe to have an apprentice because they've looked at the wages, and the wages really aren't going to cut it for looking after their family. So we need to think about that alongside as well, like the cost, like what you were saying, with funding and stuff like that. That's really important to bringing people in, and that's where the tick box exercise doesn't always work. And it doesn't work because we're missing out on these amazing groups of people who are harder to reach. And if we actually could reach them and we were able to take away barriers rather than place more, we'd actually find the diversity of all of our sectors grow massively. And that's what this is about giving them a future. But the only way we can give them futures is we also work to make sure our future continues. And I think that's what the IMI itself at the moment is working really hard to do, because we want the motor sector to thrive. We really do, but we can only do that if we invest in itty-bitty children. Like, we have to invest for them, and they don't even know what they're deciding yet, but we need to, so that it thrives going forward. And we also need to make sure that we're aware, because I think a lot of people think apprenticeship and then they think teenager. We need to think about career changes. And I think that's something, when you're saying about branding apprenticeships, we need to push that out, like, this is a big change, this can get you an amazing career that's going to look after you and yourself and your family. You know, in my case, my tortoise for the future. So it's a really important thing. So yeah, I think that's me done.
Thank you very much, and I hope that your tortoise is very well looked after.
They can live a very long
Yeah.
Signed over to my nephew just in case, you know.
Very solid commitment, and I think you know, it's right when we're talking about diversity that we do reflect individual people as individual people and in a much more holistic, rounded way, because we see, I mean, you know, even within my own political party, for example, you know, we now have over 50% women in the Parliamentary Labour Party. That's been a series of steps that have been taken over many years, including things like all in shortlists. But then actually, when you look at then who we're not selecting, you know, black men, for example, are very underrepresented in the party. There's always some element of trade-off, and sometimes if you focus too much on one specific attribute, you end up sometimes making things more difficult, even as an unintended consequence, for people that don't, as you said, neatly fit into tick boxes that almost none of us do. So I think that's a really important point you've made about how we look at equality, diversity and inclusion in the round. I'm conscious that we've got a lot of attendees online, although I can't see anyone in the chat function. So just a reminder to everyone that if you do want to ask a question and you're following along online, please do let us know in the chat if you've got one. But in the meantime, I shall be opening it up to people in the room. I can see we have a question here. And then if there's anyone else, if you just indicate to me and I will bring you in.
I think I should probably pass to.
No.
Two quick questions. So one, and I don't want to make it all about construction, but I'm curious about, Charlotte, I think touched on kind of modularization, and there's kind of so much opportunity, speaking with some construction, big construction from the other day, about this idea about making it kind of more, I don't want to say that jobs in construction aren't currently sustainable, but you're doing a lot of the work offsite, it's more efficient, you can get into kind of more sort of highly skilled areas of construction. Is there any risk that that actually, at the same time, in parallel, makes it less attractive to what has been, I guess, the stereotype of kind of people on the lower rings of the sort of socioeconomic spectrum that think, oh, that's for the clever people, it's not for people who just want to sort of get in and work on site?
I think for me, there's a distinction between construction and engineering construction, which I think we're and as a training board, we constantly face this. And engineering construction is much more aligned to engineering than it is to mainstream construction. It's those sorts of bits. I mean, so I'm not familiar with the depths of the construction industry, but I mean, you're right that there is a move towards off-site construction for sort of building environments and things like that. Is it going to change the perception of the industry? I think one of the challenges that construction faces and engineering construction faces as well is really illustrating what roles in the different areas actually are, you know, and it's a bit sort of, you know, pointing to what Beth and Kasim were saying as well, that people can't aspire to what they can't see, and I think that's definitely a problem that we have within engineering construction. I think for mainstream construction, it's probably almost the reverse problem, because people can see construction, but they don't know how it's changing now. I'm not sure that really answers your question, but I think there is an illustration and contextualization, which is a real challenge, and it's both for the the potential learners, whether they're young or whether they're experienced sort of career changers. It's for the influencers, whether that's parents and teachers, and it's for the people who are going to be giving careers advice. I think we know we've got a real challenge as a sector trying to help make inroads into that visibility.
Yeah, and I think it's just an interesting one on engineering construction. I mean, when it used to be one of the things that was on my sheet as a union officer, I remember the government came out with this thing and they were like, oh, we'll make sure that, everyone for this sort of procurement that we're doing for engineering construction stuff is paid like the real living wage, which was about 60% of what the minimum rate was at the time in the national agreement for engineering construction industry. So they were making this thing about like not just the minimum wage, but like the real living wage, and it was like, right, but that's 60% of the minimum pay rate. But there was just such a lack of understanding about what the sector was, because they were clearly, as you said, thinking more towards classic construction. It's this niche, like it's not quite this and it's not quite that, but no one actually knows what it is here in Westminster to be, making what we think are helpful discussion points that are going to drive recruitment in the sector, but everyone in it's just like, okay. So I can see if I think.
Yeah, I think construction's a mix of loads of different things. Construction engineering. There's obviously the construction trade, so your electricians, your bricklaying, and that sort of stuff. And actually, there's a massive demand for those people right now. And I don't know if anyone's had to call an electrician or plumber out on an emergency. You can't get them. And actually, more and more parents are starting to think about these things, and especially those who work long hours in offices, and they're thinking, I was saying, I have these regular discussions with family. I'm not going to quote any figures, but you imagine, someone who works as an electrician or a plumber goes and fits a boiler. It's a day job. He's going to go there, he's going to do that. He's not working long hours in the office. He's getting paid, or he or she, sorry, will be getting paid to do that job. And actually, I'm seeing a bit of a trend when I'm talking to parents to want to push their kids into trades because they're feeling like, you know, that's somewhere where if someone doesn't want to go to university, doesn't feel and is really good with practical skills, then that's where they want to be pushing them. But I think the biggest problem is, you know, as you said, construction is so big, there's surveying, there's town planning, there's so many different things happening that we need to sell the careers. It comes back to selling the careers. We need to sell those careers.
Yeah, if I have kids, they're being welders.
Well,
Don't-
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
yeah,
I was just saying, that doesn't matter what they want to do. Welding, it's, you know, get more than I get paid for welding.
I think as well, that's a really good point, is that there's 218 jobs, as I said, in the waste sector. However, people seem to disregard like the jobs that everybody sees day to day, like those garages that were set up by somebody's dad or, you know, been in the family for 3 generations. They only last if we build careers around them. Everybody has a car. Even if you don't have a car and you don't drive, you use taxis and things like that. So we really need those small like garages to exist, but we also need the big places to exist in all of our sectors. We need to make passion about all of those jobs along the way and remove all the like, and I'm going to use, well, it's the wrong word, but like nasty connotations based around them, where people are like, oh, it's cold, it's dirty, oh, I don't want to do that because it's long hours, it takes forever and everything like this. But like, actually, those people are going into work in the morning, they are long hours. Everybody works long hours because when you're passionate about a job, you're not really working, are you? Because you love it. And even when it stresses you out, you're still like, I still love this job. So those sort of things are really important. So if we're thinking about what people see, like you said, on the day-to-day, if it is just garages they're seeing, let's widen that up for them, for one, and all the other jobs. But let's also talk about how amazing that garage is and those people are in that garage, because they fix your car. Like, when your car, it's not just like a wheel that you can change, but the things inside your car that you have no idea what's going on. They're the experts, they're the heroes. So we need to talk about not only expanding across things, but taking those individual jobs that people see misrepresented so often, like I said, when they watch telly and they see it being misrepresented, to show that actually those careers are actually little heroes of the day. And it's the same within engineering, construction and stuff like that, isn't it? I think we think these massive big titles are really important. Actually, it's the job and the passion you have for that job that's highly important. So,
and I suppose the ability that one day you could own your own business, which when I was growing up, you always anticipated working for someone, but you never thought, if someone had told me at 18 that you might be able to run your own business, well, actually there's a lot more capacity in some of those trades still. Yeah.
So I'm going to bring in Baroness Garden first, but then I'm also going to bring in Alice Smith and Katie Dryden online as well. So we'll do it as like a ask all 3 questions at the same time, and then everyone can come in.
So I was I'm Sue Garden, by the way, I speak on apprenticeships and the laws of the Live Desk. But this morning I was at the Mansion House for the presentation of City and Guilds and Livery Company Awards of Master, Journeyman and Apprenticeship, mainly in the construction sectors, but there were prop makers and furniture makers and things like that there as well. But the exciting thing this year was that there were more women getting awards than there ever had been before. That's not to say that they were half of them, but there were far more. And they were really inspirational, the women who were getting these awards for this. So, you know, that's the good news. But just to go right back, and all this thing about University Invest, that's because schools are still measured on their university entrance. And I still go back to the delightful days of the coalition government when I was in Michael Gove's ministerial team. And I said to him, for goodness sake, get schools to celebrate their apprentice leavers with the same enthusiasm as their, oh, what a brilliant idea, Sue, he said, and did absolutely nothing about it. But I still think we have to get back into schools to persuade them, because when you hear apprentices talking about what they're doing, they are absolutely fantastic champions for the scheme. But you talk to them and say, did you hear about it? And virtually none of them heard about apprenticeships for schools. They've heard about it. So we have to get back into schools and persuade them that, you know, these are really good things to do. Sorry, I better shut up because I've got lots of people
and I'm
who
hoping
put their
that
hands up.
the UCAS changes there will help us
Yes,
as well.
yes.
So if we go to Alice Smith first, and then to Katie Dryden Hull, and then we'll do hopefully another round of questions after that for the other people. got their hands up.
Hi everyone, I'm Alice Smith here on behalf of the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. We primarily work to 14 to 24-year-olds, and I think the conversations we had about kind of having careers advice really early on, and where you define your career is really interesting. So my question would be to the panel is, how can the education system and other people involved in it, like ourselves, kind of influence young people to kind of show that there's a range of career options for them? I personally am an apprentice, so we'll happily sing the praises, but as we've kind of established, that the advice is still to go to university, that's where the measurements are. So how can kind of horizons be broadened?
Perfect, thank you. Katie next.
Oh, sorry, I am off mute. Yeah, I think that I had a couple of sort of questions / observations. Something that seems to be coming, sorry, I'm from the Royal Society of Chemistry. I'm the vocational skills program manager, all to do with trying to get people to understand that there are vocational routes into chemical science careers. And I think something that is coming across quite strongly here is that the emphasis here appears to be on the needs of the sectors, as opposed to perhaps the benefit to those individuals on having a meaningful career. And I think that's something that maybe needs considering, like, why are we encouraging, why do we want people to come and do these particular jobs? What's in it for them as opposed to what's in it for the manufacturer or the construction agency or whatever? And I think potentially if we pivot perhaps in terms of emphasis, and think about, rather than the emphasis on coming and working in this sector that has a particular perception or a particular image, is there a way that careers advice in schools, which there's room for improvement with, I guess, could actually pivot to get young people to consider the things that they like doing, the skills they have, the ways they like to work, their innate strengths, and where that could potentially turn into a job, because sectors come and go. I mean, we've just supported a load of our members through another round of mass redundancies at the Pfizer site at Sandwich. Sectors come and go, people's interests come and go, but what we are innately good at kind of stays with us, being an analytical person, being a creative person, being an excellent team worker, a leader, whatever. And perhaps we can get people into the job that's right for them as opposed to filling up our sectors. And the other thing I would also just sort of observe is that the emphasis on apprenticeship completions as opposed to apprentice destinations is also very unhelpful and is putting the interests of IFATE or other bodies who want to show that apprenticeships have been a success at their heart. Because actually, if an apprentice gets offered a better job and goes somewhere else and earns more money, and that's why they're not completing their apprenticeship, well, then that's great for the apprentice, not so great for IFATE statistics, but who are we doing this for, I guess? And with that vein as well, I would also suggest that perhaps restricting the amount of or proportion of the levy that employers can use on upskilling, as opposed to supporting people joining the sectors or their company, because you're not going to diversify your workforce by just supporting the people who already work in your company to upskill, would be my view, I guess. Sorry, they're not really questions.
No, but thank you very much for that, all the same, Katie. Who would like to go first from the panel?
My issue with schools is teachers have always been in education. So they start off in school, they go to university, and they go back to school. They don't know, and this is no disrespect to any teacher, because teachers are absolutely amazing. We all knew that during lockdown when we had to teach our own kids. But the issue is, and it's no fault of their own. One, they're overworked. They haven't got the time to give the careers advice that they need to give. So again, we can't bash teachers, but it's, you know, society has just made them that way, that the only thing they know is school and university, and they haven't been exposed, unless they've done other jobs, to the labour market. They don't know what's hot and what's not in terms of jobs, what's exciting, what isn't exciting, what careers are out there. And that's the biggest challenge for teachers. Whereas if, for instance, you know, they had better advice, like part of their training was to actually meet with employers and find out about where the jobs are, and they could then impart that knowledge through their learning. I think there's a whole conversation here about, you know, is curriculum right at the moment? You know, is what we're teaching kids correct, as opposed to putting the blame onto teachers or schools themselves? You know, does that directive need to change in terms of what the curriculum is, and how we choose our GCSE or A-level options? And, you know, we've got T-levels, which for me is just going to create a whole new concern for the labour market, because we can't get employers engaged on apprenticeships, and now we have to go and find employers who are going to take on trainees through a traineeship, which is only one subject. So whereas a young person would go to college and potentially do a BTEC or a City and Guilds qualification in 3 different subjects and then choose what they want to do, they're now going to make that decision at 16, and, you know, they may go into one role and do a T-level, but that necessarily isn't going to help them, you know, progress. Because if they don't like that, and just coming on to Katie's point about completions and retention, I don't necessarily think that people aren't completing their apprenticeships because they're going on to better jobs. It's normally because they're not having the support, or they're not getting the right quality of education in that apprenticeship. And that tends to be, you know, the majority of the reason that individual leaves the apprenticeship, or they're just disengaged, which is why they leave. So I don't think they are going on to better jobs, and I don't think that's the issue. That tends to be the issue. It is a massive challenge, and, you know, I can't answer it. I don't think anyone in this room can answer it, but I think we can work towards trying to make things better. And I do think curriculum is really important. What we teach young kids from a young age is really, really important.
I think that's an interesting point about leavers and how they're treated, because one of the things that I think we do need to look at when balancing with the traditional academic route for technical education is what you can get at various exit points. If you've done a year of a degree, that's a high national diploma. If you've done 2 years of a degree, there's another, I can't remember what they call it, but it's, you know, it's not kind of wasted time. You still have something, whereas a lot of the time for apprentices, if you've done 3 of your 4 years and you drop out for whatever reason, you might not necessarily have something that shows that hard work that you put in until that point, but then maybe does allow you to go on to do something else that you're more interested in or get a better job. So I think that's a real source of frustration for people. Jenny and Beth?
I mean, in terms of the education system and influence, I think one of the potential routes for trying to contextualise what opportunities are available is you know, the enterprise advisor network and engaging through schools through that way. I'll cite that. I don't actually know how well used it is for the sector that I'm working with, but I think it's something that we are we're aware of in terms of the employers that we work with about. There's also the Tomorrow's Engineers Code, the Engineering UK run, which is trying to coordinate activity, particularly in local areas, between different employers that are engaging with schools, as another way of getting information out there. I'd just like to come back on Casey's point about, you know, the sort of sector focus, and perhaps what we're talking about rather than what's in it for the learner. I think absolutely it's got to be what's the opportunity for the learner. I think for the reason that a sector focus is perhaps important for discussions like this is because you know, the realities of the context of the sector do influence how well sector can engage with apprenticeships and what the particular challenges are in terms of implementation. That's but it doesn't mean that what's in it for the learner isn't an important factor. Yeah, I'll say.
We always get chased out of the law.
We are chased out by the next people, but if anyone would like to continue this conversation in the hallway,